which is, in general, this is called the workings of the monetary unions in the world. The subject. In Russian, this is very difficult to speak. Too many words. Actually, Russian is a very wordy language. Too many words. We have to use too many words to describe very simple things. In English, that sounds pretty easy. Just monetary unions. In the international economics, or just like a part of regional integration agreements. This is very unusual times which we have to meet. Very unusual both in terms of economic prospects, in terms of life on the planet. Some years ago, a couple of years ago, economists started thinking about deglobalization. There were some research articles and other many interesting projects describing this very interesting phenomenon, deglobalization. Before that, we were talking only about globalization, economic globalization, social globalization, many other types of globalization. Regional economic integration was supposed to be a part of that great process. I still remember my first lectures in world economics almost a decade ago, and our teacher told us that regional economic integration, and he used to defend his point somewhere, like he told us, he had to defend his theses about that. So in his times, that means 10 years ago, people still did not believe, the majority of scientists did not believe that regional economic integration is going to lead to a global world, to global world economy. And you had to prove it somehow, that regional integration agreements are really a thing that is the future of globalization. Why did they think so? Well, they thought that the trend was that there were too many regional economic integration agreements, simple agreements, preferential unions, preferential agreements, customs unions, monetary agreements, free trade agreements, FTAs. Back then, somewhere in 2003, the World Trade Organization said in its reports that there were something like 400 trade unions, various trade agreements in the world. So the trend said that there were too many trade agreements, and those scientists believed that once these agreements merge in one big grouping, that would mean a globalization. That would mean some sort of a global village that was supposed to be built on the foundation of all those trade agreements. So 10 years passed, and what we see, 2016 was the very great year for integration unions, so to speak. And why was it a very interesting and very important year? Well, I think everyone knows about the Brexit issue. So Brexit was a very surprising phenomenon. First, nobody could believe that. Some people thought that that was some kind of a joke. David Cameron, Prime Minister of Great Britain, from the Tory party, in 2013 at the World Economic Forum in Davos, made a speech that almost made breaking news back then in 2013. So he said that the European Union is not a very competitive organization, and he just winked or fairly said that if you in the EU do not improve your competitiveness, Great Britain is going to leave it. And he listed out 5 points. And he said, if you comply to these 5 points in terms of better communications, better labor market, regional market, better agricultural policy, better industrial policy, better financial competitiveness in general, then we will stay in the European Union. That was a shock for all people gathered at the Davos World Economic Forum. And later he also made a speech for the British public, and he said that Britain was going to prepare for the great referendum, a referendum of a century. Because, as you know, in the 1970s, Great Britain actually joined the European Union, and they abandoned their some sort of isolationist macroeconomic policies. Isolationist because Britain was always a sort of a country isolated from the continent. There was also the continent and the channel dividing the continent and the British Isles from each other. And that was the point. Britain was always a sort of a independent country, dependent on nobody. That was Britain was part of a great British Empire and still is a part of one of the greatest institutions, formal institutions, the Commonwealth of English-speaking countries, including 30 countries and territories across the world. In some of these countries, Elizabeth II is still the head of the government, nominal head of the government, like countries like Australia or Canada. So she is the head of the state there, but nobody listens to her, actually. Everybody listens to the parliament in those countries. But this is a very important informal institution in the world economy and in world politics. So in the 1970s, Britain decided to abandon those policies because the Tory government was more like a chauvinist government that kept to themselves with British nationalism and things such as these. So they were very afraid of these chauvinistic attitude towards Great Britain. And also Margaret Thatcher was a great woman. He realized that without Europe, without a great market for British products, Britain would be always lagging somewhere behind the great industrial nations. Britain was not a very developed country back then. In the 1960s, 1930s, it was devastated by the Second World War. It was devastated by decolonization because it lost all its colonies, almost all its colonies, with some rare exceptions like Malta or the Isle of St. Helena, Falkland Islands. In the 1980s, there was a very short-term war between Great Britain and Argentina, because Argentina claimed those Falkland Islands, and Margaret Thatcher sent troops, and those 3,000 people remained with Great Britain. They still are with the UK. These 3,000 people, they use English language, and they are very proud about it. They always vote for the British government, and they stand for the British flag. So this is a prehistory of that integration process. In 1973, Britain finally joined the European Community. It was called the European Economic Community, EEC. Today it's called the European Union, and that name dates back to the Maastricht Treaty of 1993, which was, I think, one of the most important integration agreements ever created. It established the European Union, and it also provided the background for the thing which we're going to talk about all the time in the series of lectures and later workshops, the monetary union. The Maastricht Treaty laid the foundation for the euro as the currency. Germans, I think Germans were the country he opposed most of the time this idea of a new currency for the European Union. Maybe you know that in 1979 there was a pre-monetary agreement in the European Economic Community, which was called European Monetary System, EMS. European Monetary System was created in 1979, and they developed ECU, European Currency Unit. But there was this strange French sounding in it, which resembles very much the old French currency, ECU. And the Germans, of course, did not like the idea that they will use this ECU currency. Later they decided that, again, the European community decided, well, maybe we'll call it the euro, just to signify the continent. And thus the euro was created. The euro was created actually at the Madrid conference, at the Madrid summit of the EU countries in 1995.
Hi, sir.
1995, that was in Madrid, and back then people started thinking about this great monetary union which was about to come later, of course. Later, well, talking about the ECU and the theoretical foundation, the theoretical basis of the European Monetary Union, one of the most important things to discuss before we create the European Monetary Union and the regional economic integration and the monetary union in Europe, we should talk about optimum currency area. This theory was developed by Robert Mundell in 1961, so long before the whole idea of the euro, before the European monetary system. So in 1961 he published a research where he compared countries according to the level of their economic development, and he said that you got to be a country with convergence criteria to match the to match some criteria that would later be the foundation of these countries joining one single entity and create a currency which was of common use. And he strongly believed that that was really possible. He made some calculations and he identified a few countries in Europe that really confirmed to the idea of this convergence thing. He said that some countries in the European Union were really converging, and it was possible to create the monetary union in these countries. Later, the same criteria were used to analyze other agreements across the world. For example, the Eurasian Economic Agreement, also the Eurasian Economic Union, EEU, was assessed according to this criteria, and the theory said that actually this is not an optimum currency area. Today, this theory also says that the European Monetary Union is not an optimum currency area. So there are countries in this integration union, which have diverging macroeconomic data. Like, what are the major macroeconomic data, macroeconomic statistics, which we look at when we analyze the convergence possibilities? These are inflation, of course, unemployment, economic growth, GDP growth rates, current account balance, debt to GDP ratio, interest rates, loan rates, tax rates. Well, yeah, these are the key issues to look at, and they are very, very different in the European Union, and they were very different at the start of the euro, and they are even different today. So, in 2013, David Cameron spoke out the idea of Great Britain delinking from the European Union, and in 2016 came the referendum. The referendum was very simple: whether you in the UK back this idea of leaving the EU or whether you stay there. New lexica was created. Now we've got Brexiteers, a new language, so to speak. New words came into English language. Brexiteers, or leavers, Remainers. So that means these people. Remainers means people who would like to stay in the EU. Mostly these Remainers, we can find them in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. These geographical areas in Britain vote to remain in the EU, and also this is part of the idea for an independence vote of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and even Wales. But this is the policies that are going on inside this country, because this country has been divided in centuries, I think. There were civil wars there, and there were times when Scotland was an independent kingdom, and they are still dreaming about it. Although in Scotland only 5 million people live. Great Britain is a country of 69 million people, and the majority of the population voted for leaving the European Union. The major problem with this staying or leaving the European Union was the immigration thing, I believe. The immigration problem. Great Britain, when I studied economic geography, when I was a first-year student, I studied economic geography, maybe like you did a couple of years ago. But I studied it, I think, almost 18 or 20 years ago, this economic geography. And Great Britain was then a country of 44 million people. And this country was considered to be the purest country in terms of national content. So the majority of the population identify themselves as English. And unlike countries like Germany or France, where half of the population had immigrant backgrounds. So Great Britain was really proud about that this nation was relatively pure in nationalistic terms. Again, we're talking about chauvinist nationalistic policies in Great Britain and nationalistic ideas, which were not very good ideas, of course, because they produce always things such as fascism, and Nazi times also was part of this problem in the 1930s. Back then, those bloody years, and World War II also was a direct consequence of this idea that there are the superior nations on this planet and there are insects. Yeah, and this idea was the idea that was born in Britain in 1272. King Edward created this idea that this country is the very foundation of nationalistic policy. He created other nationalistic ideas, and actually Hitler was not the only person who believed that. And he just took his ideas, he borrowed these ideas from some theoreticians and scientists in Britain, in France, in Germany, of course, and in combination that produced the greatest global conflict ever. World War II, first, of course, World War I, later World War II, with tens of millions of people dying in those global conflicts. And that was at this point, actually, that people realized that they needed a change. And they created the European Union. The European Union started in 1950. French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman said that we needed sort of a union in Europe that would put an end to all wars in Europe. You know that Europe was a continent with military conflicts and civil wars, religious wars that went through centuries. And World War II was a culminating point, was the highest point in that story of great European conflicts. So, Robert Schuman, on May the 9th, 1950, this is very symbolic because May the 9th was a 5th anniversary of the Victory Day, right? And that was very symbolic. So, you in the Soviet Union celebrate the end of the Second World War, you celebrate the victory over Nazi Germany, but we in France, we would like Germany, France, Belgium, the Netherlands Italy, Luxembourg come together and create a new union, a new union, so that we could be more prosperous, more competitive, and make a sort of the background or the foundation for the political and economic stronghold in Europe and in the Western civilization. So thus they created the European agreement on coal and steel. Do you have any idea of such an organization? Have you ever heard of the existence of such an organization? The European Agreement on Coal and Steel. That was back in 1951, actually. So 6 countries came together. 6 countries. These 6 countries are still the bases, the very foundation of the European Union. They are, like I said, France, Germany, but Germany was divided into 2 Germanys back then. Yeah, Western Germany and Eastern Germany. So Western Germany joined this agreement. Western Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands. France, yeah, 6 countries joined this union. Why is this talking about steel and coal? It sounds really strange, right? Why steel and coal? Very, very strange. Steel and coal are the foundation of industry, the manufacturing industry. Germany was the country very rich in coal, right? Germany is a country very rich in coal back then, of course. And coal is a resource to produce steel, right? Coal is used to produce steel, and steel is used to produce everything else, right? Steel is used to produce the military, weapons, railroads, everything actually. Steel is the foundation of the industry, of the economy, of the modern economy in the 20th century. That was the foundation. So until Germany had those capacities to produce steel, Germany would be a military power. And the idea of the French, of Robert Schuman, was to make a common agreement and use these resources together and divide the profits, so that our workers would come into your country to work at your coal plants or coal mines, and your people, the German people, would come to our country and work for our companies, for our plants and other enterprises. And we would also divide the profits and gain from that cooperation. Those were the years of those were booming years in the European history. Europe was developing really, really fast because of Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan was the American idea to support mostly countries that suffered from World War II, and that was a very important investment package to support the capitalist countries in Europe. Why capitalist? Because the United States and other Western nations were very afraid of the Soviet Union, of the Red Army, and they thought that Stalin would invade other countries in Europe, and Soviet troops would be everywhere, in Paris, everywhere, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, everywhere, in Spain, Portugal, So that would be a complete, like they said, they feared this world revolution to come. And they decided to make Germany a stronghold of capitalism in Europe. And they started this Marshall Plan. Also, 1944, we have to speak about these issues because they're very important to understand the workings of the modern architecture of these regional economic integrations, because they all date back to the time after World War II. So 1944 was the year of what? It was not only the year of the opening of the Second Front and Normandy, when American and British troops were sent to Normandy. That was June the 6th, 1944. But this year was also very famous for a very great conference that took place in the United States a month after this Normandy troops occupation. So, in July 1944, the United States organized a world conference, Bretton Woods conference, and this was the conference, but this idea to create a new world monetary system, to go away from the gold standard, which really oppressed the nations of the capitalist world, and create a new system. John Maynard Keynes went to that conference. He represented Great Britain, and he was a great proponent of the British pound. He also was one of the greatest proponents of a new currency for the world. His idea was to create a currency for the whole world. There was not this optimum currency theory back then, because it was created in 1961, like I said. This is the year 1944. So Keynes was a sort of a prophet in this respect, for he understood that the world needed something to exchange. And this common currency, this common unit of exchange, would be a currency called Bancor, banking correspondence account. And this currency would be issued only just as accounting figures, accounting statistics. So there was no, he did not propose this currency to be created, actually, to be issued. That had to be just like numbers. You buy something and your account is the account of this currency, or the currency for your partner. He buys from you something, or he sells to you something. So that was supposed to be the currency of exchange, but nobody believed him back then. The majority of people he came to that conference thought that was a very crazy idea, and nobody would be responsible for issuing this currency, and that would be a complete disaster. Harry Dexter White, he represented the United States, of course supported the US dollar. The United States was the major capitalist nation in the world economy back then. I don't think that I got to explain to you why. The United States was the lender for the rest of the world. It lent money to the UK, it lent money to the Soviet Union, it delivered some military products and weapons to the Soviet Union, so it helped a lot. It provided us with technology, it provided other countries with technology. So that was the greatest nation on the planet, the wealthiest nation on the planet in 1944, and one of the one of the victorious nations, one of the victorious countries. Soviet Union also sent a representative to that Bretton Woods conference. His name was Stepanov. He sat next to John Maynard Keynes, but the Soviet Union did not participate in the Bretton Woods monetary system. Stalin did not want to have anything in common with the system, and we kept apart. We kept back from that union. And the US dollar became the currency for the world. Just like the euro became the currency for a group of countries in the European Union in 1999, right? The US dollar became the currency for the rest of the world. And that was 1944. Nobody, of course, nobody knew about the optimum currency areas. Robert Mundell was a very young person back then, so he developed his theory in 1961. 1951 was just the starting point for the European Union. Germany, West Germany, was very quickly came out of the recession and from the war devastation. Unlike the Eastern Germany, that was the communist country, a communist German country with its own currency and very bad economic policies. So even today, after 30 years of integration of these two Germanys, Eastern Germany and Western Germany are very different in terms of economy, in terms of finance, in terms of labor market. So people wanting a better life just immigrate in the West Germany, go to West Germany and leave East Germany. Although many billions of dollars were invested in the economy of Eastern Germany, but still this integration process is not complete. So you just can make an idea that integration process is a very, very difficult thing. What is the idea of the integration process? Why is it so important? What's the goal of it? Or what's the major benefit of it? Why do countries need to come together? Why can they live separately? Russia is a separate country. Why do I have to share a currency with, for example, Germany? That would be a very ridiculous idea, to share a currency with, I don't know, maybe Germany or the United States. Would Putin introduce a US dollar in Russia? Or would Donald Trump introduce Russian ruble in the United States? This is very difficult to imagine. Why is it impossible to imagine such a monetary union between Russia and the United States? Not only because of the political differences and economic sanctions against Russia and trade wars, but also because we are very different in economic terms. Just imagine what happens when these countries create a monetary union. I mean, Russia and the United States, countries as different as these two nations. We are very different in the language, right? Although we understand English because we try to speak it, we even study using language. Actually, this is a complete nightmare with our education because, Lomonosov in the 18th century, in the early 18th century, just struggled to make the Russian language the leading language in Russian university, in Moscow University, because all lectures were held in Latin. And he was one of the greatest proponents of the Russian language, to introduce it for the students to learn and to study. Today we make a different thing. We introduce English as the major language. This is the language of globalization. This is the language of finance. This is a very useful thing because we, each and every country in the world can understand what they think, what they feel, what they do, what kind of policies they promote. But still, despite the fact that this is the common language of globalization, we are very different because we speak different English languages. We speak Rushglish, we speak Hungarish, Haglish, or something of the sort. So they're very, very different languages. And they do not understand sometimes what we, or if we write something and would like to publish an article, for example, I would like to publish an article somewhere in the United States, and they would read my article and say that your article contains many Russophicisms, because I do not understand these sentences, because, well, you've got too many often things such as these, very difficult to understand. And if you would like us to publish your article, you really got to turn to some pro-off company that would read your article and make corrections. And only after that you may publish your article. So languages are very different economic systems. Russia is I would not say a poor country. It is a middle income country with maybe $10,000 to $12,000 per capita GDP, right? The United States is a high income country. We have a very different civil codes. We have different taxes. We've got different industrial structure. The United States is a high-tech country. Russia is a resource-based country. We produce oil and gas, weapons, and well, we do not produce iPhones, we do not produce very advanced computers, we do not produce semiconductors, right? China produces semiconductors. China is the leading nation in producing semiconductors, but we are not. Semiconductors are used to produce each and every piece of electronic equipment, including computers, smartphones, everything. Semiconductors. This is a very, very small. So as time goes by, these semiconductors get smaller, smaller, and smaller. And today you may put into your iPhone or your Samsung smartphone hundreds of gigabytes of data, just because or thanks to that very little thing. These chips that are inserted into our mobile phones, into our smartphones. So Russia has no industrial capacity to do that. And this is a very unfortunate thing. And we will never be a competitor even to China or India. in that sort of thing. So we are lagging behind. Can you imagine a monetary union between these two countries? Can we create a currency for the United States and Russia? Just imagine that we have created this currency. What happens? Suddenly, for some unknown reason, you start getting your salary in this new currency. Let's say the US dollar. Just imagine getting salary, wages in US dollars, not in Russian rubles. So this currency, if it existed, would completely erase Russian rubles from the circulation, right? And the US dollar would be the currency in this country. We also would be able to come to the United States freely. Just imagine the United States allowing the people of Russia coming to the United States. I think everyone would go to the United States, and millions of Russians would just go to the United States. Do you agree with me or not?
Yeah.
Would you like to live in the United States? I would like to live in the United States, at least for a while, and work there. So, because they've got better job opportunities, they've got better consumption culture, they've got better entertainment, better many better things. Many better things. They've got Hollywood, they've got Silicon Valley, they've got Las Vegas, they've got New York and Washington and all those marvelous cities. Well, actually, this is the country of many people's dreams. And if we create a monetary union, I think Russia would be a country of maybe only one person, and that would be Mr. Putin. He will be the last one to leave this country, like a captain leaving ship before it's going to sink. So, this is impossible, yeah? In order to create so that this monetary union were possible, what do you have to be? What kind of countries would you have to be? You got to be equal in many terms. Equal in terms of the language, in terms of culture. You got to have a border, a mutual border. So, countries being separated by oceans or other countries are not it is impossible to converge, because it is impossible to communicate. So you got to have a mutual border. Europe is an ideal place for integration in these terms, right? Because these countries share borders. And they have experience of people crossing these borders very freely. For example, in the 19th century, maybe that would come as a surprise to you, but people crossed borders freely from Bohemia. Bohemia is today it's the Czech Republic. Back then it was called Bohemia. Hungary, Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, well, Serbia, many countries in Europe were united in one country, and this country was called the Austrian Empire. So they were very different, of course. These people, they used different language, but they had an opportunity to study in Austria, in Vienna. If you are a Christian, you could be even a conductor or a film director everything in this country. This gave you lots of opportunities. The Venice was also part of this empire. So people crossed borders without any visas. They used the same currency. They served in the same army. And everyone was happy, actually. That was until World War I. World War I came and everyone got separated. And many countries emerged in Europe. In Southern Europe, of course. We also have France, Germany, Britain, of course, and other nations in Europe. Europe is a very diversified theater of nations, so to speak. They speak very different languages. French, German, Italian. They are very different languages, yeah? And they've got different cultures. They've got different political systems. They are very different people also. But in terms of economic capacity, in terms of industrial capacity, they are closer, much closer to each other than Russia and the United States. They're very, very distant from each other. Also, Europe cannot converge with the United States, right? They cannot create a monetary union. The EU and the United States, that would also be ridiculous to create such a union, because this is not an optimum currency area. They are separated, they have very different lifestyles, very different social organization. Judiciary system is very different. Britain uses the common law. You know, Britain and the United States, Anglo-Saxon countries, use the common law, so to speak. Continental Europe plus Russia and many other countries in the world use civil law. This is the law that was created by, I think, Napoleon. Napoleon was behind this civil code. He created it for France, and later it became part of many countries, legislation systems and judiciary systems. We still use it. It dates back to the Roman Empire. And Emperor Justinian, he created his civil code. This is a written law. Common law is a bit different, and it is used in Anglo-Saxon countries. So, in these terms, these nations, these worlds are very different also. And it is very difficult to come together in these terms. Europe is still and was a very diversified bunch of nations. I still cannot imagine this continent like a union. Like the idea to create the European Union was the idea to create the United States of Europe. That was a philosophy dating back to Napoleon. Napoleon was also one of the greatest proponents of the unified Europe. He wanted Europe to be a single country, and he wanted to create the United States of Europe, just like the United States of America. And what he did, what kind of integration power he used? He integrated countries by military force. He just sent troops or went himself to conquer nations, and that was his empire. That was his United States of Europe. And at the end of his military career, his military battles, his battleships, warship, warfare, everything collapsed. His empire collapsed and countries separated again. And now we have this European Union. The European Union, like I said, is a product of World War II, I think, because people wanted, and politicians wanted, policymakers and the people in general wanted peace. No more wars in Europe. They were really tired of all those devastations, of all those hardships, because it was a complete destruction of each and every civil life and every culture, civilization. It is difficult to imagine today what kind of thing peace is, really, because we live in peaceful times. For over 70 years we had no military conflicts of such a scale like World War II, and we started to forget about rotting flesh and torn human bodies. We can see this only in movies. There's blood and other bloody things. But the feeling of it, I think, calmed down a bit, and we got used to peaceful times. Today, in 2020, this is the year, we thought that the symbol of this year would be a mouse. But the symbol of this year became a face mask. Because people, COVID-19 actually solved many problems. Despite the fact that this is a very dangerous thing, but it solved many problems in terms of integration. Britain, like I said, was dreaming about leaving the EU since 2013, when David Cameron started those talks. I don't think that he started those talks. People started those talks, and the whole political foundation just precipitated his speech in Davos. So they wanted to leave the EU. They wanted this closed border policy, not open border policy. And now, with COVID-19, the borders closed, really. And it became very simple to control immigration. Nobody is going anywhere, right? So, Great Britain, actually, without leaving the EU, this problem was solved. So that means Great Britain does not have to go away to leave the European Union, but it's still going to leave the European Union, right? Because the decision has been taken and there is no turning point in this process. So is it really a deglobalization coming, or just one country leaving? At the start, in the spring of 2020, in spring 2020, many people, many economists, many politicians, policymakers believed that this is the end of this regional integration union, this monetary union. I mean the European Monetary Union, the European Economic and Monetary Union. That is the exact. This is the exact abbreviation. Yeah, not simply European Monetary Union, but European Economic and Monetary Union. So many people thought that this is the end of it. But somehow, for some reason, some unknown reason, the major leaders in the European Union, including French President Macron, German Chancellor Merkel, and other great politicians, mainly these two leaders, of course, this tandem of countries, they are the locomotives of the European Union. So they came together and decided the issue that was a problem nobody could decide, nobody could solve. What was this issue? That was the issue of common debt. Despite the fact that the European Union uses the single currency, the European system of central banks is still responsible for the monetary issue, for the monetary policy. The European Central Bank, what is it? The European Central Bank. It's not the Central Bank of Russia, or it's not the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve System. What is the difference between them, actually? Despite the fact that European Central Bank is called the lender of last resort, it is not the lender of last resort in the real sense of the word. Why? Because it cannot issue the currency. It cannot print the currency. The European Central Bank, the central bank with no printing presses. But what do they do in the European Central Bank if they have no power, have no capacity to issue money? What do they do there? This whole bunch of policymakers and consultants, advisors, economists, financiers in Frankfurt am Main, in Germany. That's the city where this European Central Bank is located. So they set interest rates. The rate of refinancing is being set at the European Central Bank. And each month, Christine Lagarde, he is the European Central Bank President, ECB President. Christine Lagarde used to be a French finance minister. Later, she became the chief executive at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And last year, she became the president of the European Central Bank. So a very great career, very promising politician. She became almost the first financial lady in the financial world, in the world of finance. Actually, she made a very spectacular career, being a president of two major international institutions, the IMF and the European Central Bank. This is a job of everyone's dream. He would not like to be the president of the ECB or the president of the IMF. Yeah? I would like to be the president of the ECB or the IMF. But this is not possible because usually the president of the IMF is elected from somewhere in France. And the president of the World Bank is elected from the United States. These two institutions are mainly Europe and American-dominated institutions. But in the European Union, things are different, and the president of the European Central Bank can be any representative of any country in Europe. So they decide upon an interest rate policy. What is the rate of refinancing today in the European Union? It is 0. So that means you got to pay nothing for owning money, for lending money, for borrowing money. That means you just take money and you pay it back later at 0% rate, 0 interest rate, right? So you got to pay nothing. In Switzerland, the Central Bank of Switzerland pays you for you to borrow money from it. Can you imagine that? It pays you because its interest rate, its rate of refinancing is minus 0.75%. And in Japan, the same thing, negative interest rates. In Russia, we've got interest rates close to 3%, 3.5% or something. This is a historic low for Russia. During the financial crisis of 2008, we had interest rates at the central bank level of 18%. 18% interest rate, and that was the start of the financial crisis, global financial crisis. Now we are at the beginning of also one of the greatest economic and financial crises to come. We do not yet know what's going to come next. I think people are still in a sort of euphoria. We are in a sort of euphoria because we do not know what to expect next, right? And we still believe that we can go through this crisis unharmed. Is it possible to go through it unharmed? Just wearing face masks, it is impossible to go through it unharmed. It will still touch everyone. It concerns everyone's human life on the planet. And today we do not feel it yet, of course, because like in the Great Depression, like in 2029, people experienced a sort of a euphoria after the stock market crash in October 1929. People were really euphoric. They thought that that crisis was very short-lived and the United States will be prosperous again. Make the United States great again. This great slogan was even back then in the United States. But years came and went and nothing happened. 10 years went by and the United States started its recovery. So it took 10 years for this country to recover from Great Depression. Do we have to live through 10 years period to recover from this crisis? Today's crisis is a very different crisis. It has many dimensions. The Great Depression was a financial crisis, which later led to economic crisis, because during the financial crisis, the Great Depression, many people lost their jobs. Today, people lose their jobs because of lockdowns, because people are afraid to go somewhere to buy goods and services, because companies wanting to deliver their products are not able to do that due to lockdowns, due to some restrictions and other sorts of things. A very surprising thing is we do not have inflation these days. The governments of the United States, of Europe, pour trillions of US dollars into their economies globally, and there is no inflation. Economic theory says that The more money you produce, the more money you issue, the greater, the higher would be inflation rates. Do we have inflation rates, high inflation rates these days? No, we don't have high inflation rates. We don't have hyperinflation in Russia. We don't have inflation in Europe, even in African countries, in Asia. So it is so surprising that economists do not know what to make of it all. No inflation, zero interest rates, trillions of US dollars flowing, being injected into the world financial system, and everyone seems to be happy about that. People are euphoric about the current situation. I think we will be able to recover from the pandemic in a year's time. I think it will take a year for the things to calm down, for all countries being open again, but the economic consequences and the financial consequences of this euphoria will be felt far behind. This decision is a very far-reaching decision to issue more money, to issue more debt. So, like I said, the European Union decided to create a common currency, but a common currency without a common debt is a empty word. You cannot have a single currency in an economic integration union without common debt. Why? Imagine a communal flat. A communal flat back in the Soviet times. What kind of flat is it? This is a combination of rooms in a big flat, right? Each person has a room in this communal flat. Imagine that each of these rooms is a country in the European Union with its own currency. Germany had German Deutsche Marks, France had French francs, Belgium had Belgium francs, Luxembourg used Belgium francs as well, Italy used lira. So many countries, each and every country in Europe used their own currency. These countries were living on one continent, but they used a different currency. And there is a hole in this flat. A hole is a communal thing because everyone uses it to come and go from this flat, right? To come in this flat and live it. And this hole is a sort of a union because everyone uses it. But due to the reason that everyone uses it, nobody is responsible for this currency. Who is responsible for the euro in the end? The European Central Bank? No. Why not? Because it does not issue this currency. Who issues the euro in the eurozone? You know who issues the euro in the eurozone? The central banks of each and every country that existed before this European Union was created. So, in Germany, euros are being printed by Bundesbank. Bundesbank is the central bank of Germany. It used to be the central bank of Germany before the EU was created, and it is still printing money for Germany. In Greece, this is the Greek National Bank. In France, Banque de France, that issues the euro currency. How to make distinction between the euro? Is euro the same currency in each of the country in Europe? Is it the same? How to make a distinction between the currency being issued in Germany or Greece or France? If you take the euro currency, a banknote, there is a serial number on it, yeah? Like each banknote, whether be it Russian ruble, US dollar, or the euro, has a serial number, right? This is a combination of figures, of numbers. Germany produces euros with a Z letter. Greece produces euros with Y letter. Spain, that would be S. So each and every country in the Eurozone has its own euro. Have you ever put attention to that issue? Have you ever looked at the serial number? So we never did that, yeah? During the pandemics, people started being more attentive to issues such as these, at least in the Eurozone. They thought that Italy, the kind of weak countries of the Eurozone, could leave the European Union, and that would be the end of the euro. Which currency would you like to buy in that circumstances? Of course, the currency of the most prosperous nations in the Eurozone. And this is Germany. So people rush to buy euros with serial numbers ending with X. Yeah? Ending with X, meaning Germany. And they started selling the currency with serial numbers ending with Y, being Greece. So when you come today home, just look, if you've got any euros, look at the serial number. So if Greece has some troubles, of course, this is a very ridiculous idea. And just in simple economic terms, because each and every currency banknote issued in the European Union has the same value on paper. But like we said, like we started this lecture today, each and every country in Europe is very different. A euro in Greece purchases a different number of products that it purchases in Germany. Do you agree? For example, if you buy a Big Mac in Greece and you go to Germany and buy the same Big Mac in Germany, you would spend a different amount of money. The same goes for France, the same goes for Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands. So that means countries in the Eurozone are very different in terms of what? Purchasing power parity. So money is the same, but it purchases a different quantity of goods and services in each of these countries. That means they've got different inflation, they've got different interest rates, different taxes, and many other things. So in this communal flat, nobody is responsible for this currency, because there is no institution in existence in the European Union that would be responsible for issuing this currency. It's nobody's currency. The European Central Bank, under this monetary agreement, has no right first to issue the currency euro. It has no right to be the lender of last resort. What does it mean? What does it say, this lender of last resort function? Have you any idea about what bailout is? Bailout is an operation of a central bank to save some companies at the brink of collapse, at the brink of bankruptcy. For example, you've got an institution, a banking corporation, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, or Citigroup, and suddenly you come to realize that it is on the brink of collapse. What the central bank does, it injects money. It buys its debts, the debts of Merrill Lynch, the debts of Goldman Sachs and other banks, and thus saves this corporation from bankruptcy. The European Central Bank has no right to do that. So nobody in the European Union, in the Eurozone, has a right to save that institution. Who is going to save it then? Of course, Germany is the most powerful nation, the most powerful economy in the European Union. Let it be responsible for the currency issue, etc. Germany says, no, I'm not going to feed you in Greece, because still you are a different country, and I've got my own people, I've got my own central bank, I've got my own taxes, everything, my own enterprises. Still, in the end, what happens? Nobody is responsible for anybody. The European Central Bank, through its existence, tried to implement some sort of economic policy that would allow it to bail out countries. And this instrument is called Eurobonds. Eurobonds is a very common thing. Each country may issue Eurobonds. It does not mean that it's going to be expressed in the euro currency, in the currency euro. Yeah? It may be represented in rubles, in Chinese yuan, in Swiss francs, in US dollars. Mainly, of course, euro bonds are expressed in US dollars, but they are still called euro bonds. Why? Because the first operation ever, the first transaction with international bonds, was done in US dollars. That's why, and those bonds were loaned out to a European country. That's why these bonds came to be known Eurobonds. Today, Eurobonds come to be as a very different instrument in the European Union, at least, because Germany does not want to pay for the Greek people. They do not want to save their banks, their corporations from bankruptcy, because in the end, he is going to pay back those bonds if you fail. So without a common fiscal policy, without a common lender of last resort, without a common budget, that's the whole idea of the integration process. Without these things, without common debt, it is impossible to create a real monetary agreement. Each and every monetary agreement with these things would be a failure. Okay, let's speak about that in a couple of minutes.